and actionable leadership insights. With more than 30 years as a military officer and a strategist, I know leadership is about real impact. In this series, I sit down with top industry leaders to uncover their challenges and their success secrets. Ready to elevate your leadership? Well, hit subscribe. And if you'd like to be a guest, visit 5eaglesleadership.com/interview. Let's dive in. Hey, welcome back to the Eagle Insight Podcast, where we help leaders everywhere in every industry be just a little bit better. Today is a super special treat for me because I have been getting out on social media a great deal lately and getting a lot of very, very positive feedback and some questions from our listeners and from our readers. And I thought it would be a great idea to introduce the person who has made me look so big on social media through her expertise. Renninger is a marketing genius and a great friend, and she has been instrumental in growing 5 Eagles leadership into what it is today. So we thought it would be a great idea to introduce you, Kara, to the audience. That you have been collecting the audience, creating the audience, and sharing a lot of my work with the audience. And I thought it would be great if you could come on and present some of the things on behalf of the audience, some of the questions and comments that we've got from our different social media channels and from email.
Yeah, thank you so much for that intro, Bob. I'm super excited because we're getting so many questions from people from the podcast episodes, from the content that you share. Like you said, I thought it'd be a really good idea for me to quiz you to get the answers to their questions.
All right.
So I want to start off with, topic that comes up a lot is like the intersection of leadership and personal growth. Which one is most important? How do you do both? So first question is, people are asking, how do you define leadership and how has that evolved throughout your career?
Oh, gosh, that is such a huge question. It's like, how do you define leadership? And the simple answer is it's getting other people to do stuff, right? It's, I think Eisenhower said it really great. He's like, the art of leadership is getting other people to do things, not because you told them to, but because you inspire them to want to do them, which I think is a really great way to think about leadership. There's another component to it. And I think what changed over time for me is understanding it's not just telling people what to do, but it's knowing that you have to take care of those people. And that means a lot of different things in a lot of different contexts. But it really means that if you enable the success of the people that you are leading, they will make the organization successful. And to me, that's the penultimate of leadership, is making an organization really successful by enabling, resourcing, and leading those people.
Yeah, I think you make such a good point there because, you can be good at delegating, right? Delegating is one thing. You can be good at telling other people what to do. And you can, even if you micromanage or you don't, but actually getting them to achieve the outcome of what you've asked them to do. I feel like that's a separate action, and that starts from where you begin as a leader. So have you worked with people where maybe they were good at delegating, but they weren't actually leading?
Yeah, I think I want to distinguish between delegating and tasking. And I think there are leaders that think that when they are tasking people with things that they are delegating. Tasking usually is about getting a thing done. Delegating is about transferring ownership of a topic, a situation, a program to somebody else, which means that you're transferring some responsibility and some authority. Now, you're still accountable as the leader to make sure that something that you delegated got done. But instead of just tasking, you have to be able to give up control. And there's where so many leaders struggle, is because they want to hold on to control. So they'll say, okay, you do these 5 things and you do these 5 things, but I'm going to micromanage that, or I'm going to make sure that it's done every step of the way to my standards. And that's great if you're doing something simple. But if you need to engage those employees and you want them to bring their best and bring their talent and their initiative and their discretionary effort, you got to get out of their way. And to me, that's what delegating is, because then it helps them grow as individual contributors or as leaders.
Yeah, and for the leader, it's important, I think, to think about you can't really scale whatever you're doing if you're unable to delegate, because if your time is involved in every activity within a business or your department or whatever it is, you're always going to run out of time. You're never going to have enough time to micromanage everything. So that was a good distinction on delegation.
Yeah, I think there's some people that think they won't run out of time, but what they actually do is they burn out, because they're willing to sacrifice the rest of their balance, the rest of their life in order to do that. And this is where leaders fall into the trap of giving up their nutrition, their exercise, their sleep, and their relationships in order to be there all the time, because they won't let go. And it's such a trap. Particularly inexperienced leaders fall into that trap easily. but there's so many senior leaders that do too.
And there's a big price to pay for that, right? Like,
Oh,
number
for
one,
sure.
you are limiting your abilities to expand what you're doing. And number two, you, like you said, burnout is such a big thing. So that kind of brings us into this idea of, leadership versus, the personal growth side of things. So what qualities does a leader need to have to be a successful delegator, a successful leader?
You're probably not going to love this one, but you got to be a little bit lazy. You can, and I'm extremely lazy, so I work very hard at being lazy. What I mean by that is once you figure out how to train and recruit, and not necessarily in that order, right? But to put the right people in the right seats, and you're crystal clear about your vision and your mission, and you can let go of things. And so what I mean by being a little bit lazy is you can work really hard up front to make sure that your people have the right resources and the right guidance that they need and the right talent that they need to be successful. And then you've got to let go. I mean, really let go, like not go just, okay, you do it, but I'm going to watch. Right. And if you think about it, just a kind of a metaphor for that is riding a bicycle. If you are a parent that has taught a child how to ride a bicycle, what is most typical is that you grab that seat from behind and you run alongside them and you hold them up as they start to fall and you make sure that they don't get hurt while they're doing it. But as they get better and better at it, you have to let go. And if you never let go, if you never take training wheels off or you never let go of that bicycle seat, they are not a bike rider. They're somebody pretending to be a bike rider. And if you never let go and let people struggle and let people wobble, they will never be a leader.
I want to break that down a little bit more. So thinking of that bicycle analogy and, teaching someone to ride that, what type of things should a leader be working on within themselves to get to the place where, first of all, they're able to delegate, they're willing to do that? You mentioned people being in the right seats. Let's say, some of the questions we have around people maybe not being at that place in their leadership journey yet. They don't have the perfect people in the right seats and they don't have the perfect structure set up. What do they personally need to focus on for their own growth so that they can be ready when they are able to deliver and delegate in that way?
Yeah, I think leaders can look down on their organizations and say, hey, do I have all the right people in the right seats? And no, Mary's not doing it right. Or we need to redefine that seat and put somebody competent there. But a really good question is to hold up that mirror and say, am I the right person? Am I in the right seat? And so introspection is probably one of those first things that you have to learn. It's about self-awareness. And if you want to work on a trait, self-awareness is probably the very first thing you need to work on as a leader. And a lot of people say, like, well, I'm very self-aware. And it's really interesting because the science doesn't bear out that all of us who think we're self-aware really are. And studies will tell you that 95% of people will tell you that they are self-aware, but there's somewhere, if you have both components of self-awareness, internal and external, the people who have both, there's somewhere around 15%. That's a big gap between the 95% of us that think we're self-aware versus the 15% that really are. So at any given time, about 80% of us are delusional about that topic. So working on your self-awareness is something that people can do. Sometimes it takes feedback. So if you want to work on your self-awareness, you have to find somebody you can trust who's going to give you honest feedback. You have to spend a little time trying to process some of what we call deep work. Process why you react the way you do to certain information or certain situations. Understanding where your emotions came from, where your worldview came from, where your biases come from, so that you can understand when somebody's bumped one of your beliefs or your biases. And okay, somebody's bumped it. How important is that to me? And why am I having a response to it? So spending some time doing that deep work so that you're more self-aware. And the external piece of that self-awareness is understanding how you show up to others. Because other people will judge us on our actions and our words. We're going to judge ourselves based on our intentions. But if our intentions are not clearly communicated to other people, they're going to judge us on what they perceive are our intentions. So self-awareness, I think, is the number one thing that leaders can work on, should work on. And by the way, it is a habit, not a moment.
That's good. I love that. A habit, not a movement. Some of the things I heard you say to work on your self-awareness. And I feel like no matter where you're at in your leadership journey, you should always be working on this, right?
Yeah.
From what you said, you should always be trying to become more self-aware. And I have some follow-up questions on that. But in general, it sounds like getting feedback from other people is important. What are some actionable ways that, your listeners can get some feedback from other people to help bring some awareness for themselves?
So there's a couple. Is we have this term, we have a position in the military called a sergeant major. Now, your sergeant major is your senior enlisted advisor when you're a senior commander. and they don't actually have direct authority. They have indirect authority, and they know the troops. They grew up in the line units. They know the trade. They understand the struggles down on the line. And their job is to keep you as a commander straight. And I'll tell you a quick story. One of my first moments with my sergeant major when I first became a senior commander, we were dressed up in one of our fancy uniforms, and I had been a field soldier. I wasn't used to wearing these uniforms very often. And they had come out with a new uniform with new pants on it that had an extra belt loop on it. So two belt loops on one side of it. Now it seems very silly and small, but I missed the belt loop when I put it on because I don't expect to see two of them over there. And before we were going out to this event, Sergeant Major says, "Let me check you real quick. You missed a belt loop." He wouldn't let me go outside until he fixed that. Now, for many people, they're, "Oh, it's so picky. And by the way, you're wearing a jacket. Nobody's going to see it." That's not the point. The point is that we want to be impeccable in uniform. And I missed something, and I have a person who's responsible for telling me I missed something. Now, that just became a metaphor for how we operated together for the next 2 years, because it may not have been a belt loop. It may have been, I forgot to put a safety on in this range. I may have been that I forgot to inform a company commander that they needed to do something really important. It may be that I was wrongheaded about something that was going to adversely affect soldiers and their families. And my sergeant major would come to me and say, "Have you thought through this? Have you looked at it like this?" Now, a practical way that you could do that outside of a military contract is to deputize somebody in your organization as your sergeant major who you can trust is going to tell you when you are screwing up. They're going to tell you when you missed the belt loop. They're going to tell you when you're doing something, making decisions that are going to adversely affect your organization. It takes a lot of trust, and it takes a lot of really confidence to be able to give somebody that authority. But I'll tell you, it's
Yeah.
a game changer.
It sounds so powerful to think of that, to deputize somebody,
Yeah.
and really give them an authority to say, a lot of times as leaders, you have meetings and you tell people you want their input, but maybe you don't actually have a culture where it's really acceptable to do that. So to actually give somebody that authority to give you that feedback and to help you think through any areas that you need to think through it is really powerful. I love that suggestion. You said something that I want you to elaborate on more. You talked about the sergeant major having indirect authority. You
Yeah.
talked about direct and indirect authority. Explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, Sergeant Major doesn't have any direct reports. There's nobody that specifically, he might have had a driver that reported directly to him, but all of the authority came down through what we call green tab leaders. He's a green tab leader, but nobody directly reports to him. So he doesn't have to write efficiency reports or hire and fire people. His job is to use his influence and his knowledge and his wisdom. So he coaches, teaches, and mentors all of the non-commissioned officers throughout that organization. And most importantly, he's coach, teaching, and mentoring me. He's got a little bit of, he's usually got a few more years on me. In that case, he had, I think he was probably 8 or 9 years older than I am. But he didn't direct what happens down at the companies. That comes from command authority. But I can tell you that if he wanted something done, it was going to get done. But that was done through informal power. Right. And if you look at the French and Raven types of power, there's the formal and informal powers. He lacked formal powers, but he had informal powers in spades.
I was going to say, it sounds more powerful, the indirect. And thinking of how do
Yeah.
you translate that into corporate, it sounds like, I always think great leaders have mentors, and that's what that sounds like in a sense, a coach, a mentor, which I know is something, we offer at Five Eagles, but it's something that I think leaders can be thinking about for themselves. As you can deputize somebody to give you some feedback, but it's not a military structure. So in that sense, sometimes having somebody external to give you some insights about yourself and your team is really valuable, would you say?
It would. And since you don't have, and by the way, having an extra person around there that doesn't have any direct reports at the senior level that you're paying a lot of money to is tenable in a military structure, and in small business in particular, it's not. It's just expensive to have somebody
Right.
hanging around that's making everything better, but not actually producing revenue. There are kinds of people in different areas of your company that can do that for you. Right. So there is usually an executive assistant or secretary or some structure around that you can deputize to be the one that looks at you and say you missed a belt loop. Right. You're going out with your tie crooked, whatever the equivalent is, to be able to give you that feedback. So maybe in that area, it's really useful. But she's probably not the one that's going to be giving you feedback on whether or not your fourth quarter proposal for budgets is going to fly or not with the board. And that's where those external mentors or even board members can be really, really useful. And I think if you're have a vote as a senior leader in an organization on who gets to sit on your board, making sure there's somebody there that complements your skills, that has something that you don't have. And then you communicate with them clearly and often, and you open up their ability then to mentor you. It makes a huge difference for your ability to operate at a level that the board's going to like, and you're also going to show up looking great and in the right,
Yeah.
what was it? Be in the right place at the right time in the right uniform. And if you have somebody that can do that sort of thing for you as well, but they have to have license to be completely honest with you.
Yeah, that sounds like the most important part of it. And I'm always fascinated to hear, the military into the corporate and how things translate. And it is pretty fascinating that the military is wise enough to know that having a sergeant major type role is really beneficial when you think of it, because it is such a large organization. But like you said, in smaller businesses, some of those things might not be possible. So another question that we've been hearing from people is, like, how do you balance all this need to transform yourself? There's part one of that is, how do you not be self-critical? How much self-awareness is being too critical? And then how do you balance, like, you're leading other people to change, but you have to change yourself? What's the balance in that?
Yeah, it's a constant struggle, and look, it's a rapidly changing world. The jury's no longer out on that. We know it's moving faster than it's ever moved. It's changing faster than it's ever changed. So you might be the right person in the right seat today, but the seat's changing. So are you
Yeah.
adapting with it? And the key there is also the feedback loop, right? Yes, I spend a lot of time coaching senior leaders on how are you keeping up with the rate of change in your organization and in your marketplace. Oh, by the way, leader, you should be watching that marketplace, not just looking down. You got to look up and out. But how am I getting that feedback? And this is where I have other coaches, and I have coaches that coach me because I believe in coaching. If I didn't believe in coaching, I wouldn't be doing this for a living. But I have coaches that I get to talk to that look at me and say, hey, by the way, I've noticed this about what you're doing. Maybe you want to think about it differently. And so for me, that external feedback, because I don't have a sergeant major right now, but what I do have is I have a Kara and I have an Elizabeth who makes sure that I stay straight in my schedule. And I have a Mike who frequently calls me up and says, hey, I was thinking about what you said the other day, and I'm not sure you're right-headed about this. And sometimes he's right. And I'll argue with him. We'll push back. But that process of challenging who I think I am and who I am becoming and how I'm going about doing that is incredibly valuable. And if you don't have somebody in your life like that, I would encourage you to find a Mike or find a Kara and find an Elizabeth. These are the people that help you be truly successful. But you got to be able to give up some control, and you got to be able to open your mind. I had a great boss that told me you got to have a thick skin and not a thick head. Listen to your feedback.
That's what I was thinking when you were talking,
Yeah.
right? I like that, a thick skin and not a thick head, because, it can be challenging for people to balance the world changing so fast, all the effects it has on families and just, all of their life, and to be able to be in a state of openness. It's making me think of, how people's in the fight or flight and kind of their cortisol levels as they're managing
Yeah.
stress that's happening for them. And what are some of the things that you do as a person to help yourself stay balanced so that you can receive and be open to that? Like, what are your personal things that you do to keep yourself in check so that when you get that feedback, it doesn't hurt, instead it's positive and constructive?
So I'm very fortunate to have a lot of great mentors in my past, and I read voraciously. And I really wish I remember the source of this, but when you get feedback, you got a choice about how to respond to that. And a lot of people get into that fight or flight. I'm getting feedback. I'm being personally attacked. I'm going to have to defend myself, or I'm going to have to get out of the situation. But you always hear feedback's a gift.
Right.
So why don't we receive it like that? So that's the mindset. When somebody's starting to say, hey, by the way, when you said this, this is the effect it had, I can go, well, that's not what I meant. And you're listening wrong. You're listening wrong. Can you hear me? How about you receive it with grace, like you would any other gift? Thank you for caring enough about me to give me that feedback. Thank you for caring enough about this organization to tell me what I needed to hear. Thank you for that. So I'm going to receive that with grace. Now, the next step is a little bit trickier. You're going to have to reflect on that feedback with courage. So you receive with grace, you reflect with courage. And by courage, I mean you have to really open up your mind and be willing to be criticized. And if you ask yourself this question, because the first thing you're going to do is, that's not true. Somebody accused me of being only worried about my legacy, and that's why I make the decisions I do. You're only worried about your legacy. I was shocked. This is not something that I had thought about a whole lot. And when I received that feedback, I could have just said, no, that's not true. You don't know what you're talking about. Go away. Or I could say, thank you for that feedback. I'll get back to you because after I process that. So I process that with some courage. And the courage question is, what am I doing or saying that would give them that impression? What did I do or say that would cause them to believe that about me? Now, you see what I did there is I changed the onus on that to me. It's not just about them. Maybe they have a chip on their shoulder and maybe they have a bias towards seeing people who are narcissistic, and so they accuse everybody of that. Racism, that comes in a lot too. If you say anything in a certain way, may be accused of that. But even then, what am I doing or saying that causes somebody to think that way? And if I can't come up with a good answer, then I need to ask them, what am I doing that's causing you to think that? And then they may or may not tell you. If they do tell you, then you again have this, thank you for that feedback. And then you have to reflect on that with some courage. The third part of that is how you respond to people. I always want to respond with purpose. So I want to receive with grace. I want to reflect with courage, and I want to respond with purpose. Thank you, Kara, for that feedback. That's important to me. And I've thought about it, and I think you're right about these things, and here's what I'm going to do about it. Here's where I would disagree with it, but I will tell you why I think you have that impression, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. I think I said this intending this, and I think you heard it this way. Now, if I respond with that purpose, I have probably, hopefully, created a bridge between me and that person who gave me feedback, and they may be willing to give me feedback again in the future. If, on the other hand, I go into fight or flight and I tell them they're an idiot for thinking that, that's the last time I'm going to get any feedback from them. So I've done two things, right? I'm worried about my own personal growth. I'm using the feedback to grow as a person because now I understand how I'm showing up to the other person. So that helps my external self-awareness. But I'm also creating a connection with somebody who might work for me or that I might have influence with in my job. So it does both. It's a very powerful way, and it's easy to say, and it's really difficult in the moment to stop and say, hold on, I want to apply this model. But man, I tell you, it's powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. So actionable for everybody. And I feel like, so many things we can take away from that. It's such a good model to follow. That was really the last question about this was, what are common barriers you see? I feel like the answer might be obvious, but I want to ask you, when it comes to implementing something like this and being open and receiving, what other the common barriers might you see people having?
Your ego. It's like, okay, leader, it's not about you. And the part that is about you is about your growth. And here's the thing, I mean, we know this. You don't grow when you're comfortable. You grow out of being uncomfortable. And you hear this, be comfortable being uncomfortable. No, I don't buy that. I think, and I know I've used that phrase in the past, and I've since reflected on that and talked to one of my coaches who said I don't like that, and now I've adopted that attitude. Is that, look, if you're uncomfortable for a reason, if you reflect on why you're uncomfortable, there's an opportunity to grow. So don't be comfortable being uncomfortable. Be okay with the idea of that because it's an opportunity for growth. And you're uncomfortable because your ego got bumped, your worldview got bumped, your bias got bumped, your belief got bumped by something somebody did or said, and some of the feedback that you got. So if you could get out of your own way to open your mind, receive with grace, reflect with courage, and respond with purpose, and you can let your ego step aside for a minute, the sky's the limit on your growth. And it's uncomfortable going through that process. And good. I'm glad you're uncomfortable because that means you're growing.
Yeah, such a good measure of that. It's such a interesting topic. I think you gave such great ideas for everybody to really think about. This idea of the intersection of leadership and personal growth. How can you lead? And I think that was perfectly put. And how can you grow at the same time without delaying one side or the other? So I think a great call to action here for the listeners would be, I would love for them to add a comment wherever you're seeing this episode about the best piece of advice that you ever got that really helped you grow the most. I think that'd be so fun to hear what everyone else has heard out there and get some more information on that. So thanks for sharing all of these answers. I know we answered a lot of questions in the session from the audience who's wanting to know more about how to grow and how to lead with more confidence. So thanks for answering those, Bob.
Kara, it's my pleasure. And I love the idea of getting more feedback through wherever you're watching this or listening to it, that we will collect those up and make sure that we are I just want to address it. If you've got great ideas and the greatest piece of advice that you ever received that helped you grow, by all means, I want to read those on the air and make sure that people are spreading that around. Because our mission is to make every leader better. And if you guys are contributing to that as well as an audience, I love that. So Kara, thank you so much for today. I think this is a fun way to get back to our audience on some of the questions and things. It's difficult to answer every single email or comment that comes in the various platforms that we're at, but thank you for doing the work of collecting those up. And I think this is going to be a two-part series. I would love to continue this conversation as we gather up more from our audience and get feedback.
Thank you. Okay.
Super fun.
What do you think? Did you like that?
Yeah, this was great.
Okay, good. It was a good conversation. I mean, it got to some really like good actionable things for people. And it was. Is there any feedback you want to give me?
No, it
That
was great. I think you're following up on what I'm saying. So it's not just like, okay, I had 12 questions. I'm just going to read them verbatim and go, okay, that was a great answer. Let's move on to the next one. No, so it
yeah,
was very conversational. So yeah, I like
good.
this.
Okay, good. Yeah, I did too, and I think you put some good stories in there, and it really helps like paint a picture for people on. It's as simple as the belt loop, or
Yeah,
it could be more complex. All right,
yeah,
should we do another one?
yeah. Do we want to stop and so we make it as a separate recording? Is that easier for the team?
Good.
Okay.